Welcome back to another lesson. Now let's get back to the development of our API. So I have npm run dev here. It's running the server with node-mon. Now let's get back here to server.js, and I'm gonna remove the hello that I had added before. Now we have this endpoint to get all the entries, but notice as I add a new entry and I keep adding entries, if I restart, see what happens. It's all gone. And you can see this is happening because every time we hit the route, it's creating a whole new array every time, and it's regenerating the entries. So it's not really persisting, at least in memory. So let's change this a little bit so we can persist those in memory. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this entries array out of the route handler function and into the global scope of the script. That way entries will only be defined once, and we'll have these three. Now that's nice, but as we add something new and we refresh, it's all gone. And that's because we're actually not even hitting the server to add a new entry. You can see as you click the network tab and you type something and click write, no new network requests appear. Right? So we need to make a new network request to the server and asking the server, please create this new entry. And the server can say, okay, fine, or it can reject with an error message. Perhaps you had sent an empty message or some very, very long message that the server refuses to accept. And that's called validation, right? In any case, let's get back to what we're doing. Let's take a look at the client-side script.js. When we click write, what happens? Remember that we had added an event, click event to the submit button. Every time you click that, it's grabbing the value that was typed in the text area. Then it's checking for errors, validation, right? And finally, it's calling add new entry. But when it calls add new entry, all it does is it adds a new entry to the page. But actually, it didn't call it. It didn't call the server. So we need to do an in between here. So before we actually add anything to the page, we need to first make a request to the server. So how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to follow the same approach we did in fetch entries, except it's going to be an entry to create, not to obtain what's already in the list of entries. So let's create a new function here. I'm going to call function create entry. Okay, the function create entry will be responsible for making a request to the server. So let's do it. Well, how can I make requests to the server? Use fetch. Now fetch takes the first argument is where is it, right? So what's the URL? We're gonna say http://localhost:3000. That's where our server is listening. And we're gonna say /entries. In this case, it's a bit different because it's going to be what's called a post request instead of get. So because of this special case, I'm going to add a second argument to fetch, and that is going to be the argument for options. And in the options, I'm going to say the method is post. So I pass as a second argument to fetch an object. This object has the property method that has the value post, so that when it makes the request, it will be a post request instead of get. Okay, that's the first step. Now you need to send something, right? And that's the text that you typed. How can we get that? Let's take that as an argument to the function. Create entry. Actually, let's do the following. Let's say entry as an object. Let's assume entry is an object. Entry is an object like this. Has a text property with the value of what was typed there. Okay. Now we have to take that entry and we have to convert that object to a string, and that string will have the format JSON. That way the server can interpret your request properly, because this is our server is what's called a back-end API that serves JSON format. It accepts JSON, it produces JSON as output to you. So to do that, let's add a new property to the options given to fetch. Let's call it body, and that's going to be the entry, except we need to convert it to JSON. To do that, we can use the module called JSON or object JSON, and there's a method called stringify, and you call that with whatever you want to stringify. In this case, will be the object entry. So this will become some text with the format JSON. It's almost the same thing, except the keys will now have quotes enclosing the text, right? So this would become like this to adhere to the JSON format. Let's also add some headers just in case. Usually you want to add the content type application JSON header. So here at the end, one more option called headers for this request. And the key will be the name of the header, content type, and the value will be the application/JSON. Let me use double quotes to be consistent with our code. It doesn't matter in this case. You can use double, single quotes. Choose a style. Okay. Let me add a comma just for style. So fetch, okay, great. Fetch/entries and its method post. Here's the entry, for example, could be like this. And headers, it's just saying this is content type of the body, right? The body should be interpreted as application/JSON format. So we're gonna make that request to the server. Let's see what the server says. Let's go back to server.js. And notice we have app-get entries, but we don't have posts, so we have to add app.post/entries and add a new route handler, res anonymous function here. So let's just do a console log here of whatever, let's say the request object. I don't know, there might be a lot of stuff in there. Let's just see what that is. And then I'm gonna send something back. I'm gonna say okay 200, something like that, just so we have some response from the server. Now you can see node-mon already restarted my server, so I don't have to do it manually. Now let's go here and back to script.js. I didn't call this yet, right? Let's make sure to call it every time you click write, and I'll pass the validations, right? Add new entry. Well, we cannot add it just yet. So let me just comment that out and say create entry, and I'm gonna say a new object with the property text, and that's going to be the entry text. So I'm passing an object that I just created, an inline literal with the property text. That's the entry text, whatever we typed in the text area. Let's try it out. refresh your page, type something. Let's type hello world actually. Click right, watch the network tab of the browser. You can see there's a new request. Let's click on that. Request method is post, correct. We got it 200, okay. Notice the request headers here has content type application JSON. That's what we wrote, what we set. Notice the payload is what we're sending, and you can click view the source here, and it's exactly what we had there. So it's the entry, right, object in JSON format. Notice the double quotes enclosing the text key. Now let's see the response from the server. Okay, 200, that's fine. Now let's take a look at the terminal, because the server is running here, and if you do a console log from the server side, it's going to appear in the terminal. So it's a lot of stuff, and this is the request, right, object, and that's a lot of stuff in here. But let's see, let's start from the beginning if we can find the beginning. There you go. So incoming message, other stuff, readable. Let's see if we can find something that we recognize. I think I saw something before. Something about the body, maybe? I don't know. Or maybe it's in a buffer format or some sort, I don't know. Here's the headers. Let's see if we can find content type. Here, this is what we set in the client. So it's appearing here. The server received that. That's great. Route, path, and so on. So we're getting something from the server side. So that's great. So let's continue now. So from the server side, what we're going to do is the following. Given we have this array here called entries, how about we add to the end of the array every time we call post entries? That makes sense, right? So let's do it. Remove the console log and let's say entries dot push whatever the new entry is, right? We don't have it yet, but let's assume we had it. So entries dot push whatever. And then usually when you create, if you follow REST, what's called REST convention, RESTful API convention. When you create a resource, like a post/resource name, usually you send back the created resource, and that created resource includes the ID that was generated from the database. Okay. So let's send back the new entry. Let's say, oh, I'm typing the wrong key. Sorry. Let's say that new entry somehow had an ID. And that ID, let's say, just to simulate the database, let's take the length of the entry because it kind of, let me see. The first one is ID 1, then 2, and 3. If you take the length of entry plus 1, that's going to be the new available ID, right? The next record will be ID 4. That's an available identifier. No one has that yet. So let's do that. Let's do entries.length. That gives you 3 right now initially. And you add 1, it'll give you 4. So ID 4. And of course, I need to say what is the text, right? That's going to come from somewhere, and that somewhere it was given by the client through the body, right? But we don't know how to access that yet, right? So let's try something. What if somehow the request had the body and we could just reference like this? It'll be very convenient, right? Let's do console log. Rect body colon rect.body. It'll be undefined right now. And that would be actually text because rect the body would be an object. And later on, we can do a refactor use dot turtle dot. I'm gonna teach you how to do that later. So we create the new entry, push that, and then finally we send that new entry back to the client. And the console log is just for debugging. Let's take a look. I mean, write something. Write something happened here. Oh no. Cannot read proper text of undefined. That makes sense. Go back to the server. You can see rec body is undefined. But how can we define it? Well, we're gonna have to download a third-party module. Could be something like body parser. Go to Express. Let me see if they have in the Express website. Let me search for body parser. Something. Let's see if they mention anything here. Body parser. Yeah, there's a body parser middleware. Body parser. Let's take a look here. There you go. So here's the module we want, body parser. And we can just app.use body parser like this. So it's a middleware that will do the following. Since our client is sending the record, right, the new record to be created in the JSON format, the server has to take that message and convert it as well back into, take that JSON and convert it back to a JavaScript object so it can use natively through Node.js, right? Meaning it doesn't know what to do with the text itself, but it takes that text and parses it, and it creates an object, JavaScript object, with the information from that text. Okay, JSON formatted text. So we can do it like this, bodyparser.json. So we already learned how to apply a middleware, right? Something that comes in between the request and the ultimate response. Let's go here. Let's first install body parser. So I'm gonna kill the server. I'm gonna say npm install. I'm gonna call it's body-parser. Fine. Now you can see body parser is under the dependencies. I'm using 1.19.0 here. Now go back to the server. And you see you have the cores middleware. We're going to add the body parser. App.use body parser.json, call it like this. Now this has to be imported. I'm going to go here. At the beginning, I'm going to add const body parser in camel case require body-parser, semicolon at the end. My style, semicolon here too is my style. Now with that, there's going every time you get a request, it's going to pass through the body parser middleware, and it's going to automatically convert the JSON string into an actual JavaScript object. With that, it's going to set the rec.body property with that object. Now let's restart the server here, npm run dev, and let's go back to our site and reload. And I'm going to do, I didn't have to reload that. I'm going to add, right, you can see in the console log here, now rec body is defined and it's an object whose key is stacked, and this is the text. Looking here at the row in the browser, you can see that the response that we get, let me see response, the raw response is the actually created, the new entry, and you can see the new ID here, ID4 was added as well. And of course this is not, the browser likes if you click the preview tab, the browser will automatically make this look nicer to you, but the actual response is the one-liner, like that. Very nice. Now going back to the text editor server.js, I'm going to do this refactor to spread. So let's say that your request had many properties. So you could type one by one like this, rect body, ASD, whatever, and keep doing that, right? But that would be tedious. One other way you can do that is like this. You can say .rect.body. What this does is it copies all the properties from the object rect.body and adds it in to this new object. Now, mind you, you have to be careful here, because the client could be somebody else who's trying to do something bad in your system. So the client could add in some extra properties in there, or perhaps your client were not giving all the necessary properties, even though it could bypass the client-side validation. Mind you, client-side validation is not safe at all. Anybody can bypass that. So you have to make sure to have validation on the server side. Okay, so what I would advise here is you have to have some way of first filter accepted or properties, okay? Say the client gives you like text, whatever, but also says something else here, something else here. You don't want all this extra stuff. Maybe it's a malicious client trying to do something bad. So you want to make sure to eliminate that before you do anything else, and even pass this to even a database to try to create a new record. So you want to filter the accepted properties. That's something I leave it as an exercise for you to do. Find a way to go to the object and only take the properties that you want. Of course, what we had before works just fine, right? And that's actually a good way of filtering it. Like this. That way it only captures the text and everything else is discarded. Right? So I'll leave it like this, and I'll leave it as an exercise for you to figure out a way to do that. You can make some sort of system that's nice, that you can make like accepted properties is some array like text, whatever, and then you can loop through it and generate a new object that excludes all the other undesired or invalid properties, something like that. You make a new function, okay? Make a new filter helper function. For example, filter, I don't know, filter entry properties or whatever you want to call it. An exercise for you. Okay, let's go back here to the client side. I'm going to refresh the page. Let's see if this is actually doing anything. You can see as a type and click write. Even though it's not appearing in the client side on the DOM, right, the document object model, the request is made. If I refresh, it appears magically. Because when you make a request to the server to get all the entries, that array of entries is in memory, right? Since I didn't restart the server yet, because I didn't make any change just now, it still keeps that in memory. Mind you that every time you make a change, everything will be wiped out in the server side, because everything will be reloaded and restarted. So it will go back to the original state. But as long as I don't restart the server, it will persist at least in memory. Of course, that's not ideal, right? Because you could restart the server many times throughout the history. You don't want to lose your data. You don't want to keep your data all in memory. That's really bad. What you want to do is store that in a persistent data storage. And that's, you can use a database, right? And that's eventually going to store your data in the hard disk, the hard drive. Not in the computer memory, because computer memory is volatile. It can come and go frequently. So that's nice. So let's get back to the script and fix the client side. We have the create entry here, but we want to make sure that it adds a new entry. Well, of course I could sequentially do this, but that's not good. Why? Because of the asynchronous nature of JavaScript here, and also of the request response model, right? Because when you say create entry here, you're calling this function. This function will call fetch, but then it will continue execution of the program, and immediately after it will add new entry. It probably would add a new entry even before it got a response from the server. So to illustrate the point, I can do the following. Let me see. I can set a timeout here, and let's do this to 10. So I'm placing the fetch under timeout, meaning that after a certain number of milliseconds, I want, let me put 5. 5 seconds is 5,000 milliseconds. After 5 seconds, it's going to execute the fetch. So it's going to delay it by 5 seconds. And because of the asynchronous nature, it's going to call create entry, and immediately after it's going to add the new entry, even though the server did not fulfill our request. Let's try it out. So I'm going to click right. You can see no request, but it was added already. You can see no request in the network tab. And finally, after 5 seconds, the request is here. And the server said, okay, I created a new entry. So this is not good at all, right? We have to wait for the request to be fulfilled. That is, the client makes the request to the server. And that might take some time, right? To reach the server, and then for the server to process your request, and finally for the server to send back some response. And that takes time. Because of that, it's asynchronous. So there's some time you have to wait. And we cannot just do things like this. So in order to add a new entry here, we have first to wait for the create entry, that request to be fulfilled and successful before we can add a new entry. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, we're going to do that through promises. This is concept of promises, right? We already handle promises in the .then here and .then here. So let's try it out. So we'll do the following. Let me remove the time out here. Should I remove it? Yeah, I'm going to remove it right now. I just wanted to illustrate the point of delaying. So fetch is actually returning a promise when you call it. So after that promise, we want to do something, right? So we usually want to do a .then, and that's going to give you a response. And that response we need to extract, right, what we got back. Usually is the created entry with the ID. So I'm going to grab that. Even though we already know what we typed, I'm just going to grab that because the server included the ID. So I'm going to take and return response.json, right? Remember we did that here before. We need to convert that into a JavaScript object, okay? And finally, we're going to get the entry. And what we're going to do with the entry is going to append right here. And let's see what we can do here. I could move this add entry here, but now that I'm thinking about these things again, I actually want to separate them because I want to create entry have only the concern of making a request to the server, and that's it. And I want to separate that from the actual manipulation of the document here. So I'm going to return here the fetch, meaning the function create entry will return whatever this operation does. In this case, returns, let's see, fetch returns a promise, and then do .then to handle that promise. And from that, you return response.json, which by itself is also a promise, right? So this is going to return a promise. And we can use the same .then outside when you call this to handle what's going to happen after the promise has been successful, right? So let's go back here to create entry. This returns a promise, so I can chain a .then, right? And that returns what? That's going to give me the entry as the parameter. And we can use that actually to call add new entry here in this anonymous callback function. And instead of entry text, I want to say entry.text. And actually later on, if I wanted to, I could include the whole thing that would have the ID and everything. But since I'm not using that, I'll just let it be, because we're keeping it simple right now. So this returns a promise that is handled with the .then. So after this is successful, we got a response from the server, and we converted that response to an actual JavaScript object so we can work with. This JavaScript object appears here in the callback as an argument entry, and you can call add new entry, entry.text. If you want, we can set a breakpoint here if you're just curious about what this is about. So I'm going to go to the browser, go to sources, script.js, find the block that contains that new entry, and you can click line 55 here to click the number, and you can get a breakpoint in this red circle. You can type something, click write. Now, after calling create entry, you can see there's a network request here. It was successful, and finally we are at this point line 55. And you can hover over entry. You can see actually that's actually the thing that was created right from the server side. And if you see entry.text is whatever we typed, and that's great. It's being passed to add new entry, which will create a new entry in the DOM. You can click resume here, and it's here now successfully after the server accepted it. That's great. Now, what happens if the server was down? We simulated some sort of error. Let's see. Click the terminal, kill your server. Now try to add something again. Click write. Something happened. Post, error, connection refused, failed to fetch. Well, the user didn't know what happened. So that's something we have to fix. You can see the request. Failed to load response data. So what happened? Let's see. So where is it making the request? Right here. Notice that this could fail, but we did not handle the failure. How could we handle the failure? We can use a catch block. So let's think about it here. Create entry. If this failed, you could catch it here, for example. That would be one way. And the argument would be the error. Oops, typing the wrong key. Let's console log that. And let's go here. Can I even put a breakpoint there to see that it's actually going there? Let's restart. And I'm gonna put a breakpoint in create entry, catch. Let me remove that other one. I click here to deactivate the breakpoint on line 55. I'm going to type something, right? You can see it goes there. It tries to make the request. It fails. Because it fails, instead of going to the .then, it goes to the catch. Okay? So if this promise is, if this tries to make something, this promise is rejected with an error. And because of that, it goes to the catch block and it skips everything, every single then after, in between them. So have the error here. You can hover over it. And let's console log it. You can click F8 or press F8 or click that. You can see we got log type error failed to fetch. So we can use that to show error message here. Let's try it out. Remember how we did error messages? We did a validation, remember, on lines 50 through 55. We have an actual new entry error element that we add the class, actually remove the class to make it appear. something like that. Let's take a look in the DOM here. If I click in here, there's some thing hidden. You can make it show with this checkbox here. You need to type at least one character. Of course, the text will be wrong for this new type of error. So now you want to change the text content of that. Let's check it out. So we could do that here, or we could change the concern and let the caller handle the error. Let's do that. So instead of doing the catch here, I'll let whoever calls create entry to be the handler of the error. So here I have the dot then. If anything happens, I'm gonna put a dot catch, and we're gonna do the error thing. So I'm gonna target the error span. So you could actually do the same thing over again. Copy this code. Since the variable is in scope here, I probably could use it again, but you might want to refactor this later, because I don't want to be too dependent on things that have different concerns, but it's fine. Let's do error span. That grabs the remember that span with the error that's hidden. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the text content to be whatever error that message we got. So error has a property called message because it's the type error or whatever error. Error usually has a message property in JavaScript, error object. And I'm gonna say error span the class list dot remove new entry error hidden class so it can appear. I'm assuming the error exists, so you might want to add a guard here in case it doesn't exist. But I'm assuming it exists, but we gotta be careful. We should maybe add an if statement here. Otherwise, if there isn't anything there, it's gonna create an error, right? It's gonna error out. Let's refresh and okay, type something. You can see now failed to fetch is here. Okay, now the user knows what happened. So we changed the text and we made it appear. Now if I rerun my server, let's do. And now server is back and I try to add something. Now it's working. Okay, you notice that the entries, let me remove all the breakpoints, remove all. And if I kill the server and I restart, you can see the user doesn't know what happened. So I want you to, as an exercise, add an error message here saying like whatever, could be that same message. So the user knows that the server is down or it could not fetch the entries. So that would be whoever calls fetch entries, right here. You want to add a catch block, dot catch, and then you're going to do the same thing, similar thing that we did here. You're going to change maybe you want to create a new area of the page for the error, or you could use the same error that we had here. I probably would use the way I would do it is I would actually make a new element for the error that's related to the actual list. Because when I think about the user interface elements or components, this text area with the button is something separate from the list itself. So the list itself should have its own error message. It should handle its own error, and that's separated from the error related to the actual text area, to the submission of the text. Okay, so that's an exercise for you. Let me see if I can add here somewhere. Where's the fetch? Exercise dot catch error here. Do whatever. This is a multi-line comment. There's // for single line, and there's this /* and */ everything in between as a comment will be ignored. Okay, let's summarize and go over what we did so far. Let's see if the server is running. Let me restart the server. Now, so we added a new route to create a new entry on the server side. And when we type here, click right, it actually makes a request to the server. And the server here has a new route that's post. Let me remove the console log. We don't need it anymore. It creates a new entry, takes a new ID that is available and includes that in the new entry. It takes the record.body.text. Record.body is set by body parser, a middleware that we used. It's the npm package body-parser. Require it, and then you can use it up here. And every time the request comes, that text in JSON format will be converted, be parsed into an actual JavaScript object that's easy to work with. And that object is available in rec.body. We took the text from that object and created a new entry. I pushed to the array that's in memory for now. We don't have a database yet. This is just for us to have something to work with. And that was added to the end of entries. So that will persist as long as the server is running and was not restarted, right? If I add something, I refresh, it's still there. That's very nice. So we fixed the front end too. Because it was always adding something even though the server did not approve it beforehand. So we have create entry that makes a request, HTTP request. After that, if everything's successful, we go to .then and actually add that to the document in the page. If there's any errors, we do a .catch block here and remove this extra semicolon. And we show the message next to the right button. As an exercise left for you to catch the error that might occur when you fetch the entries for the first time as you reload the page. I suggest you kill your server and restart the app to simulate some sort of error. With that, that's it for this lesson. I hope to see you next time. Have a good one.